10:03, so we will officially get started. My guest today is Chief John Drake, Metro Nashville Police Department. Chief Drake, it is an honor to have you on this morning. Thank you for being here. We usually start, well, I've got Councilmember John Rutherford is on the call, and Councilmember Gloria Hauser is on the call, and Brenda Wynn, our county clerk, is on the call this morning.
Okay.
We'll probably have some more.
Mm-hmm.
We just got the numbers in on COVID-19, 27,153 cases in Nashville since this thing started, 251 deaths. The increase in the number of cases yesterday was 144 from yesterday to today, and unfortunately 3 more people died since yesterday. So anyway, those are the COVID numbers. And I think I covered those things that I needed to cover. Anyway, Chief, we're really glad you're here. So let me start again by just asking you, tell me, you were talking about you're from Nashville, you went to public schools, you said you were a nerd. Don't hold that against me. So other stuff, where'd you go to high school?
I went to East High School. Well, I went all the way through the public school system. Went to Ross Elementary. I went to Bailey for the 7th grade. It was Bailey Junior High. It was just a single year there. Then I went to Meigs. It was another single year for the 8th grade. And then I went to East High from 9th through my 12th grade year. So.
Okay. And then you went to college, and you graduated summa cum laude?
I did. I started at MTSU, and then I just had to stop, got a job, becoming a police officer. And so I went back to Bethel University while continuing to be a police. Actually, I was an investigative lieutenant at Hermitage Precinct. So I was balancing all the investigations we were having in the Hermitage area. At the same time, I was going to school. And I finished summa cum laude. And I was, very proud of that honor. I remember that day just vividly because my father was deceased at the time. And I remember listening to the music and walking in, and I thought about him. And as soon as I walked in, it just had a tear like trickle down because I knew, I felt like he was watching over me and that he was proud of that moment. But I've always through school gave a just tremendous effort in trying to make the best grades possible. No doubt.
Right. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So before I ask you how you ended up in the police department, I need to go back to this thing we were talking about when we started. And this is this Wendy's thing. You said 1983 or 82?
1982. I graduated in 1983. So.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Will you tell the people who may have just tuned in, your picture was in Wendy's because you were Wendy's type of person. I don't know exactly how that, but how did you, I'm a Wendy's type of person just because I go there and get their hamburger, but you got there because you did something good in the community. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we had some challenges in the neighborhood I grew up in. In fact, I walked to school with 3 other people. Those 3 other people wound up later in life going to prison, drugs, robbery, those types of things. And so I actually had a better path. My parents stayed on me, and when I came home from school, I had to do homework immediately. I couldn't go out and play, do all those things that other people could do. And so I kind of became the person that would, try to help other people. I would talk to other people about how important education was, how important sports was, and how important sports was to my life and keeping me out of trouble. And so I was able to get other people to join in and play sports. Other people I would help. Have conversations with, keep them, out of trouble. Couldn't help the ones I walked to school with, later in life as they became adults, they did, what they did. But I, would talk to people all the time. Some people graduated because of our connection. We studied together. I pretty good grades, obviously, and so was able to help them. So Wendy's did an article. It's during the wrestling season, and talked about it, and so they put it up, and it was pretty neat how they went from the sports aspect to also how it was helping people in the neighborhood. Pretty nice.
Good for you. All right, I'm going to go look it up. Do you actually have a copy of the picture that was put up in the Wendy's, or was it just the article that was put up?
I have the picture and the article. I do.
Okay. All right. I think we probably need to see that, Chief.
Okay.
So if you can send it to us, that would be helpful because we're going to post it somewhere.
All right.
How did you decide to become a police officer?
So I had finished playing football. I obviously wasn't going to be a professional athlete, and so I had a cousin who was actually putting in for the police department, and he called me and said, "Hey, this would be a good opportunity going on in the community. You've always been helpful in the community. It'd be a chance to have a broader platform to help more people." And so back in 1987, we talked about it. I put in for it. And I went through the process and got hired in March 1988. So when I made the phone call to see if I was employed by the police department or going into the training academy, they had told me that I was. And so immediately I called my cousin at the time and I asked him, did he get in? And he, surprisingly said he did not make it. And so it was sort of a bittersweet moment. The person that asked me to join didn't make it, and I did. A year later, actually, he applied again, was actually able to become a police officer, and he actually retired about 3 years ago. So he had a very, very good career, including officer of the year. So.
All right, so you've been with the police department since 1988, so you're a 32-year veteran.
Right, right.
Okay, and just again, for people who may not know you, so tell us a little bit about what you've done during those 32 years.
So those 32 years, I started out in patrol. I worked at the West Precinct. That was my first assignment on the midnight shift. Then I went to the second shift, was a B detail from 3 to 11, still in the West Precinct area. There, I had what some people considered one of the toughest neighborhoods, the Joe Johnson area. It was a housing development. It was a lot of crime. Had some police officers that had been killed in the line of duty in that area. And so I remember it was kind of a daunting task. But I went there and I remember the crime rates dropping. I remember getting out and working enforcement in drug enforcement areas. I remember making community ties. In fact, I went in for a burglary case, and I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to our case, that I was supposed to take a report, turn it over to an investigator and let them finish it. But I took a burglary report, found a driver's license, went down, pulled a lineup, took a lineup back to the victim, identified the suspect, was able to find the suspect the next day, charge him with burglary, in which he confessed to it, and wound up getting Officer of the Month. And so it's been a great career. From there, I went to Crime Suppression Unit, which was street level drugs. Then I went to the Narcotics Vice Division where I worked upper level narcotics. From there, I decided I really didn't like working narcotics. I didn't like undercover work. I remember we did a seizure and we took a bunch of items and we took some kids' toys. And I remember it just didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel right when the detective said, hey, the kids will learn not to be a drug dealer. And while that may be true, maybe they look at their parent, I just felt like I wasn't making the most of my career at that point. And so I decided to put in for the Police Athletic League, which I did. And so in the Police Athletic League, I started a basketball program, which turned out to be one of the biggest basketball programs in the country, actually. Had almost 1,200 kids. In fact, the National Football League of all came down and looked at it, came down from New York City, and they gave us $150,000 to go with another one to build the Lytton football stadium. So Lytton has a football field and a stadium with an irrigation system that was paid for by a private donor and the National Football League from some of the efforts that we were doing. And so from there, we were able to have kids that play professional sports, but also that are teachers now. I went to speak over at IT Crestwell, and the assistant principal actually played in the program, played basketball. And it was just, and I had no idea until I got there and I went up on the stage and she was there and I was like, wow, it was just neat. So I did the police athletic league for a number of years, and decided to come back to work. I remember having an illness, and I had a sergeant. I talked to the sergeant about it, and well, they thought I had surgery, thought it was cancer, and so I did it at Summit Hospital. And so for 2 weeks, I was waiting to get a second from Vanderbilt. And I remember in that time, I had a sergeant call me. You know, sergeant is like your number 2 guy, he's the person you trust the most when you're a officer. And the only thing he was concerned about is when I was going to be able to get back to work. It didn't really care that, you know, maybe I was dealing with cancer. And I remember I was just hurt by that. And so from that point on, I decided I wanted to go into supervision. And so I started taking the promotional exams, start going through assessment centers. And it was a pretty quick rise up from about 2006 to now, from sergeant to lieutenant to captain to commander, deputy chief. And so as I made sergeant, I went back to the North Precinct where I did patrol. And then I wound up going to the Office of Professional Accountability. That's our internal affairs, and I was able to investigate police officers. It's a very good learning experience because you learn that it's not you that are hurting officers, it's officers that are making mistakes or committing crimes, and you have the opportunity to clear that, to hold people accountable, and it makes the police agency better. And so I did that for almost 2 years, and I got promoted to lieutenant, went to the Hermitage Precinct. And then so I rebid. We had an annual rebid. I rebid for North Precinct. It was closer to my home. And then not long after that, I was asked to become an investigative lieutenant. And from there, I worked at Hermitage Precinct, where we had a lot of investigation. We investigated everything from petty theft to homicides. And so we had a very good investigative team. I remember we did it was an initiation called Operation Mayday. And so in Hermitage Precinct, we had a series of murders in the J.C. Napier University Court area, and also in just the Hermitage Precinct area in general. And so we were able to investigate these murders and do an indictment. So we presented to the grand jury. And once we got the true bill, within a week, we had arrested about 24 individuals and cleared about 7 murders. And so not long after that, we had a pretty good string of no murders in the J.C. Napier University Court area. And I can't give you the year of the article in the Tennessean, but it was about hope. And it came out on Christmas Day, where they talked about how this area that had been plagued by violence was actually had a year where they didn't have a homicide. They did have some shootings, but not homicides. So it was a very good touching story. It made front page on Christmas Day. And so I was very proud of the accomplishments we made. So I actually took the promotional test again. I made captain. I went to the overnight field supervisor section, which oversees the entire city. Any critical incident from murder to armed robbery to officer-involved investigations, the field supervisor goes out and makes sure that everything is done in compliance and done right. And so after about 7 months of that, I had a meeting with then Chief Anderson. He actually texted me about 4:30 that morning and said, "Hey, can you meet me for breakfast?" And so I'm thinking, what in the world did I do? Why? Because you don't normally get a text message at 4:30 in the morning from the department head saying, "Do you want to have breakfast?" You know, so I was like, okay, what is this about? Right. And so he asked me, he said, "Well, hey, I want to give you a division, and I want you to go over the domestic violence division." And at the time, I had investigated domestic violence. I had, when I was in patrol, I had Sergeant Wynn. And Sergeant Wynn, in my opinion, is the guru of domestic violence. He does presentations all over the world, actually. He's been to Russia to talk about domestic violence. And so I had the honor of working with him and knowing, how, victims should be treated, how serious these calls are, and how we needed to hold suspects accountable. And so I went to the domestic violence division and had a very good time there. I think it was a little over a year there. We started working on the lethality assessment protocol. I didn't like the domestic violence supplement that we had. It was like a 1-page addendum to our incident report. So an officer would go take a call, And then, so you had to do a domestic violence supplement, which was kind of a redundant of what had already been done. And so I got with then Lieutenant Widener, and so we started developing a supplement that would have all the information that, you know, could be used in any type of domestic violence case. So we looked at other agencies and we put our own together. And I believe other agencies around the country are looking at our supplement and saying, hey, this is a really good supplement. Can't take credit for all that. A lot of it was Lieutenant Widener. It's just a vision I had. And working with people like Diane Lance, I mean, just, you know, just neat to be able to do that. From there, I got a call from Chief Anderson again about a year and a half later, and he said, hey, I want to make you commander. And so I was thinking I was going to go to the Hermitage Precinct because that's where I had spent a lot of my career as a supervisor. And said I was going to Central Precinct. And at the time I knew not a lot about the downtown area. And I was like, wow, why Central? But with everything else in my career, I take challenges and I take challenges head on. And I said, well, that's a great opportunity. I don't know anybody in the downtown area. I don't know any of the businesses, any of the merchants, but I hit the ground running. And I started meeting people, started hearing their concerns. I'm a good listener. And where I can make change, I'm always willing to do that. And so I developed some great relationships. They exist today. When I see a lot of the business owners, merchants downtown, they're excited to see me. I'm excited to see them. I do lunch with some occasionally. In fact, a couple of the merchants had a ceremony at Central Precinct where they wanted to give Commander Howie an award and then also give me an award for the precinct for what we had done for the protests and riots and also for the coronavirus, our efforts in that. And they served us ice cream. I can't tell you the last time I went up to an ice cream truck and had ice cream, but this is how much people downtown appreciated the efforts that we had ongoing.
Right.
We started a downtown entertainment district team. It wasn't as big as I wanted to have it. I had at the time, the deputy chief there wanted to just kind of keep it at a minimum, but I wanted to have a unit of about 20 people that was just dedicated to downtown, to Broadway, to the Gulch, just visible, like Times Square. Everywhere you see on the sidewalk, you see officers walking, interacting, helping businesses, taking phone calls, making sure they're deterring any type of crime. And so we had some very good things happen at Central. And then from there, I had a meeting. It was going to be at Public Works I believe it was at 2 o'clock that day. And so at 12 o'clock, again, I got a phone call and it was to be in Chief Anderson's office. And I'm thinking, oh God, what in the world am I being called for 2 hours? I said, hey, I got a meeting at 2, but hey, he was like, hey, can you be here at 12? And I'm thinking, sure. So I went, he said, hey, I'm promoting you to deputy chief. I went over the Support Services Bureau. Support Services Bureau seemed like it was everything in the police department. I oversaw every building that we have, every precinct. I oversaw every police vehicle, every motorcycle, every bicycle. Oversaw the aviation section. Oversaw SWAT. I mounted horse patrol, aggressive driving traffic unit. And just a host of other things. And it seemed like I was over the entire department. I mean, it was just so much going on. But from there, with all the specialized units, I wanted to make sure that those officers who usually have a mission knew about the sanctity of life and the importance of the community. And so we had meetings geared just towards community engagement. And so we coined a bear, and it's called the Guardian Bear. And so what I wanted to do was have officers go to Vanderbilt's Children's Hospital, Centennial Children's Hospital, meet kids that are, have, illnesses, et cetera, and interact, show the great side of police officers that we have, give them a guardian bear. And so that's even blown up even bigger than that. So we've gone in communities, we've met kids, we've given them guardian bears. The guardian bear was actually given to a female police officer from Australia. And she went back to Australia and they posted in their newspaper of her, and she had the guardian bear. So the Nashville guardian bear is actually in Australia, and other people are doing similar things.
Well, Chief, let me ask you a question about that, because one of the questions that popped in with a number of the people that were sending email or sending questions in this week, your philosophy of policing. Obviously, you've had a tremendous background in all this stuff, in the number of different things you've done. But tell us a little bit about, what would you say? I know there are different philosophies of policing. How do you see yourself? What is your philosophy being a police officer?
So my thoughts, the philosophy, we have a multifaceted approach to what we have. So you have your proactive policing, which I think has caused us a lot of concern around the country, not only around the country, but also here. And that's really led to the report of Gideon's Army, the report Driving While Black. And so when people look at that, the first thought, you say, well, the police department has racist police officers, and that wasn't the case at all. What it was is, when you had hotspot policing, which is another area that we use, when you have calls for service in the area, it generates a hotspot. And so officers were sent to those areas to try to suppress crime, to make traffic stops, Terry stops, field interviews, do whatever they can to create high visibility and suppress crime. And so what happens as a consequence is that in those areas, they just so happen to be minority neighborhoods where they had most of the problems. And so you have a lot of proactive policing, and it seemed like that it was over policing an area. And in my opinion, it really was, but it was an unintended consequence. And so as I came into this role, I wanted to try something a little different. We had the policing project come out, and they came from New York City, and it said proactive policing didn't have an effect on crime one way or the other. So all the traffic stops and all the things we were doing really were more victimizing people. So we may pull someone over in an area and give them a citation where they paid $90 for the citation. That $90 may cripple them. It may just impact them so much adversely that we really hurt the community more. And so my philosophy has been, let's do community engagement. If we want to have a good police department, which we do, we have to meet people where they are. And so we go into areas and we walk and we talk to people and we meet people and we give them our phone numbers and we say, hey, we're here for you. We want to be a part of your community. And so when they call, they can say, hey, this is going on in my area. Can you help us? They get to see the good side of policing. We've gone in, we've redone basketball courts in areas. We've actually played basketball with kids on courts. We've done tutoring for kids at like Midtown Hills Precinct. We've done field days. We've done movie nights. And in fact, we got an email from a resident in the South Nashville area, and it's an area that's been impacted by drugs and prostitution. And so we had officers from our community engagement team that went in and they cleaned up this particular area. And so now the community in this area is helping keeping this area clean. And so the lady sent an email and said, hey, I feel like I have my neighborhood back. I thought I was gonna relapse. I thought I was gonna be back on drugs again. I was gonna be hanging out with these people. And I thought maybe I was gonna be a victim or maybe even a suspect in crime. And so to hear that and knowing that, we're putting community engagement there, but we're also empowering people. And so that's a form of community policing. So we also know that we need to do some proactive policing. And so we're doing intelligence-led policing with our juvenile crimes task force. And so like most cities around the country, I sat at a table with major city chiefs from Chicago and New York, and they talked about how they could get the federal government involved with juveniles. And I was thinking, incarceration hasn't been the answer, and that's still not going to be the answer. But we do need to do something with kids that are committing crimes. So our juvenile task force, they do intelligence-led. They look at kids who are chronic offenders. They're breaking into cars, they're stealing guns, they're committing robberies, they're committing aggravated assaults by shooting people, some even committing murders. And so we've actually had great success with that, but not targeting wholesale neighborhoods, but actually finding problem people in problem neighborhoods and hoping that it's going to create a better community. And so,
right, so one of the questions, Chief, that people had asked was in terms of the philosophies and the youth, because you hit that one. How do you deal with overly aggressive police? So you were talking before, obviously, about the change in philosophies between what we used to do in terms of stopping everybody. Now we've changed over. But I think obviously one of the concerns floating around all over this country and in Nashville is dealing with over aggressive policing. What would you say about that? How do we deal with that in this city?
So the big thing is, and what I've talked about is de-escalation. De-escalation is something that we have to have. We have to lose that sense of urgency. And I think we showed that when we had the incident in the Edge Hill neighborhood. I called in several people as I reviewed the video from that incident, and it's like, what was the urgency? We were looking for something that we could have waited out. And so the whole theme is, when we can wait, let's wait. And that comes from my days of been overseeing the SWAT program. And you have a barricaded subject, they're inside, they have a weapon, maybe people inside, but time is on our side. If we go in, someone's probably going to get hurt, probably going to be the individual, maybe an officer. And so we've talked about the escalation. We also have sergeants that do evaluations. They keep a close eye on officers. We have a human resource memorandum where if an officer is involved in too many incidents, whether it's complaints, use of force, it creates a mechanism to where we do a review to see if they need to see a peer supporter or go in for a wellness check, and we do all of that. We were noted in Washington, D.C. for having our peer supporter program, which is just nationally noted, one of maybe in the 5 in the country of how we support officers for wellness. And that way, officers go through things too. And so let me talk about the emotional side of an officer. An officer can go into a situation and can have a great moment. You can have a family that you help. You can save a life. You can have a situation where you're making an arrest, get into a fight with someone. You can have an incident where you have a baby that's deceased. And then all the while you go home, you may have home problems. You may have a kid that's not doing well. You may have a wife or husband that has problems. So all these things are weighing on the officer. And so we try to make sure we have wellness to help the officers. And so let me share an email we got just yesterday, and I won't read the entire thing. But this lady said she was walking down Linden Avenue in Belmont, and she came across 4 officers that was arresting a Black man. The man was extremely belligerent. He wasn't cooperative. She hadn't seen anything like this in the past, but she knew the situation was escalating pretty hard. She was concerned, and she felt like the situation could have headed south quickly. But she wanted to commend the 4 officers because they were patient, did not react aggressively, and were able to successfully escalate the man's tension. And at no time did the officer show any disrespect. After several minutes of resistance, they were able to safely take the man into custody. This is from a citizen, and I get all these kind of emails all the time. It's just titled to the chief of police. And that's what we're doing. We're taking away the sense of urgency. We're here for the community. We want to be a part of the community. Let's de-escalate. There are situations where you don't have time to think things through. And I'll give you a prime example. Years ago, I pulled over a gentleman who's by Fisk University. And I noticed he was rambling around, doing different things. And instead of walking up to the passenger side of the vehicle, I went to the passenger side. Instead of going to the driver's side, I went to the passenger side.
Right.
I'd seen he had a .357 Magnum, and he was holding it, and he was waiting for me to walk up, and he was just going to pull it and fire. The tips of his bullets were filed down, would have penetrated my vest. I was able to take him into custody, not a shot fired. And he told me, he said, I was going to shoot you. I have a drug habit, and I didn't want to go back to jail. And I thought about that, and I share that with officers as well. And if you look around the country, you see, there are some overly aggressive officers, but they need to know that we can de-escalate. There's ways that you can handle the situation better. You can take a different approach like that. And so we've done well with that so far. So.
Okay. Well, so continue on that. So one of the questions is the training aspect of it. And we had Captain Greg Blair on like about 4 or 5 weeks ago talking about the training. So people ask about de-escalation, anti-racism, dealing with implicit bias. What's your vision of training? Do we need to change some of that? What is the best way to make sure that we don't have problems that come down the road? Even though, you know, one of the things you may want to touch on is how many times you all get called during a given year. You know, the police department gets called all kinds of times. Obviously, you had situations yesterday. Training. How do you make sure that people understand the training and they do what they're supposed to do?
So what we do is we make sure from the very beginning that training is, well, so a new thing that we're doing, and I talked to Chief Loki, is that we're providing all the new recruits with a training handbook. And it talks about de-escalation, it talks about implicit bias, fair and impartial policing. It talks about just a numerous different things that we want to do. And so it's officers in the mindset or recruits in the mindset of what to expect when they get to the academy. When we get to the academy, they go through implicit bias training. They go through ethics training, making the right decision, instant decision-making model, where they assess situations and they look at the sanctity of life. They look at just numerous different ways of training. And de-escalation is one of the biggest ones, and we're actually improving that even more. Governor Lee just signed an order where he's adding, our officers go through 40 hours of in-service training once they graduate from the academy each year. And so through that 40 hours, Governor Lee signed an order where they have to take an additional 11 hours. And so this order, I believe, was signed yesterday. And so instead of 40 hours, it's going to be 51. And the main crux of that is going to be more de-escalation training, more fair and impartial policing, and just, you know, more about just being better police officers and the reforms that we're having. And I think it's gonna, that's my vision moving forward, is that incidents I see around the country is there's a sense of urgency. There is a lack of de-escalation. There are, in some cases, bad tactics. I made a statement after the Kenosha incident that it was bad tactics, I thought. I made a statement after Minneapolis that I felt that was just a criminal act that was committed by someone in a uniform. So we talked about that. We've talked about de-escalation, the duty to intervene, ban chokeholds, so we don't have that. We don't shoot at or from moving vehicles unless there's it's just a last resort, imminent life is at stake. A prime example of that is that on Broadway, a little over a year ago, we had an individual that had rammed several cars. And he was actually headed toward a group of individuals on Broadway when also fired fired a shot. Had he not fired that shot, it would have run over several people that was in that car's pathway. And so I don't know how many people would have been, you know, potentially killed or injured. So in those situations, but it's the last resort, and that's how we want to use our use of force.
Okay, I get it. Let me change to something, because Don Aaron, your communications guy for the police department, just sent out something about there was a Titans player arrested last night for DUI. You may not be able to comment on it at this point, but Isaiah Wilson was picked up for DUI. Can you comment at all, or at this point it may still be pending?
Yeah, it's still it has to go through the process. So the player, I believe, was cutting donuts or whatever in the street, hit a wall on Charlotte, and was an injury. And just got there, and so the investigation is ongoing, but they charge him with DUI. we've already contacted the Titans, and I'm sure the players have reported to the NFL as well. So, but that's going to be, and also it actually blew a .10, so not good.
Okay. Let me ask you one of the more difficult questions, and I will tell you, we got more questions in advance for you than anybody else we've had on our show, which means that people are paying attention.
That's awesome.
Okay, so talk about the notion of defund the police, and it it means lots of different things to lots of different people, but the concept of defund the police. Talk about that from your standpoint as the chief.
So I actually understand what people are saying when they call for reform, and they want to defund the police. But our budget is about 90% personnel, and so when you start defunding police, you take away individuals. And so we're allocated for 1,511 officers, and we're about 75 officers short. And so even if we had full strength, authorized strength at 1,511, we're still 200 to 300 officers short, I feel, that required for Nashville to keep this city safe. You look at Memphis, and they have a smaller geographical area, but they have about 500 more police officers. And so when you look at defunding, I think taking away from the police department in that aspect would hurt us more because we lose officers and it could potentially make a city unsafe. I do believe in reallocation of resources. I believe there could be some designated for homeless or displaced individuals. We started a program with the Central Precinct. It's called the Quality of Life Team. I'm just trying to have everything where we can engage the community, every aspect of it. And so the Quality of Life Team works with homeless and displaced individuals, and they connect them to the Homeless Impact Division, the Salvation Army, and with others. And so they're band together instead of working in my opinion, silos. They've come together to team with us to see how we can help more homeless to get them back on track, to get them into housing. We have mental health. I believe we could divert some funding from there, but not from the police department. But I'll tell you something that I've thought about doing, and it may come to fruition because it's been heavy on my mind, is that when we have officers respond to psychological calls, sometimes the uniform escalates the situation, and that's how we get barricade individuals. And so I've thought about taking plainclothes officers, enhance their training on crisis intervention training, and then teaching them with health professionals, maybe mobile crisis or others, and creating a team where they respond to mental health crises. And it may have some potential to take officers away that may have a limited amount of training. We do train on that, but we make people that are specialized in that, and private individuals who deal with that extensively. And so, so when we look at funding, I look at reallocation, but not totally defunding.
Right. So focus back on the mental health aspect, because we heard that from the sheriff. We talked to the sheriff. It's a part of the training I know that goes in with Captain Blair. But one of the concerns I think that we've heard before on some of these calls is the if somebody gets arrested on Monday, they have a mental health issue, and they go through the system, and they get rearrested on Wednesday, and then they get rearrested on Friday. So it's like a revolving door of the same folks. Not all situations, obviously, but with a number of folks. So part of the idea, when I think of defund the police, once, we kind of understood what we were getting at, was certain areas that maybe resources should go to deal with just handling a situation that needs a different type of review. So particularly mental health, you mentioned the homeless. How do we do a better job of that? I know you've got different ideas about how to do it, but I've heard that if you make an arrest, or if you're there in a situation, you can call that mobile crisis unit. But are there better ways to do that, to deal particularly with the mental health aspect of this?
So you have that, and then you have someone that may be arrested, and so we have rapport. Each precinct has a district attorney, assistant district attorney that's assigned to them. And so what we look at is we have communications with them for people that are chronic offenders, or they continue to get in trouble. They have a mental health episode, they break out a bunch of windows, maybe urinate on the street or whatever. And so we have communication with them to see how we can connect them to other services as well. And so with the sheriff coming on with the behavioral care center, I think that's going to give us a major inroads as well. So when we have someone that goes through a mental health episode, we can connect them with the sheriff. We can have them in that facility to get the treatment that they need. It's all about treatment. And I think when people look at mental health, they don't view it the same as someone that has a broken leg. You know, someone has a broken leg, you go see a doctor and you get that broken leg treated. They look at mental health as there's some type of stigma attached to it. I think we have to look at it differently and have a different approach. And that's how we're going towards. Think through all those aspects, working with the district attorney, working with the sheriff's department, working with the advocates, working with the downtown partnership as well, because they're involved. I think we can make great inroads. We continue to have crisis intervention training. You look at Rochester, New York, and I'm not sure, what their training is there, but you have an individual that's definitely having a mental health episode. He's in the middle of a cold street, unclothed, and they put a bag over his head, and eventually he becomes deceased. Sure if the bag had anything to do with it, that's still an ongoing thing. But officers know to have compassion and empathy. They know to get someone up, to wrap them in a blanket, to call an ambulance. And so we continue to go above and beyond with all our training, with all our scenario-based training as well, so that when officers get in real life situations, they can deal with it better. So.
Okay, all right. Let me switch a little bit to, obviously we've had some allegations of sexual harassment within the police department. And I know at least you've been involved, at least in the discussions and what we've seen in the paper. Obviously, it's one thing to train, and it's another thing to make sure that people comply. What can you tell us about what's going on in terms of internally, maybe not necessarily the case itself that's pending, or maybe you can talk a little bit about what's going on with the case itself, but kind of a renewed effort to deal with preventing sexual harassment within the Metro Nashville Police Department.
Mm-hmm. So what we're doing is we had a series of allegations, and so those allegations have been investigated. Some officers have been sanctioned, received pretty significant sanctions. Some hadn't received any because it was not sustained. So we had that back from a group, Silent No More, and so they listed a series of officers that may have been involved over a 10-year span. We've taken those investigations and made them public. So anyone that wants to see them can see the investigation, how it unfolded, and what the sanctions were. Also, we called for an independent investigation. The mayor wanted it by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. I support that investigation. We're waiting for the conclusion of that. In the meantime, Silent No More has said they have about 33 individuals, up from 19, but they won't provide any of the names for us. We need those names. The TBI needs those names so we can investigate. But we take sexual harassment very seriously. I have been on the platform. I've stood out and said I won't tolerate it. This police department won't tolerate it. But I also feel like we have a good culture here. Do we have some people that get it wrong? Do we have men and women sometimes that interact and some things are said later that are not appropriate? So another thing that we're doing is that we started a direct line with our HR department. And so any female officer, or any officer period, that feels like they've had any type of sexual harassment can call the Human Resource Department, and they can have a direct link to me, the chief of police, and that's never been done before. I'm very serious about it. We're not going to have any tolerance for it. And so we're also going to have training. We've talked to the YWCA. I worked with them quite a bit when I was in domestic violence. So Shane Foster is putting together a program where he's going to do a 45-minute session for all the officers to review. We're going to have another program for the executive staff and also officers as well. So everyone from the chief of police down to the officers are going to go through training as well, just to raise awareness. And so we're going to put that on the forefront. We're going to deal with whatever's happened, whatever allegation that we can prove to be true. We're going to hold that officer, that person accountable. And then what we see that's not true, we're going to talk about that as well. But then we're also going to make sure there's a culture here where people know if there's something happens, they can talk about it. And our culture is good, but we want to make sure we expand it even more. So,
let me ask you about, you had mentioned about kind of keeping an eye on officers if they start showing a tendency to have trouble. Mm-hmm. Continued supervision. So one of the things we talked to Captain Blair about was the training, and then continued training. And unfortunately, you can train individuals all the time. They're not paying attention, or if they just, sometimes they just forget their training. How do you, and with a police force, a number of employees that are in the police department and under your care, you're always going to have some bad ones with the good. Yeah. Continued supervision. How do you try to make sure that you're dealing with the ones that are going to cause more of the problems? Because that's the things that we hear about, obviously.
Yeah, what we want to do is identify those individuals. And so the sergeant is the one that's closest to any officer. So any level that span of control is about 9. And so as they start seeing signs, they start reviewing reports, complaints. Maybe they get excessive complaints that come in, or maybe they get a couple and they review those and say, hey, we have a problem here. Or they have use of force incidents, and this officer continues to have more use of force than anyone else. So that rises to another review. And so, and when we talk about use of force, all our use of force is reviewed in layers. It goes from sergeant to lieutenant to captain to deputy chief, field supervisor, and then to me. And then we have disciplinary hearings. And so, so we make sure we hold officers accountable at all levels. We talk about that. And then also in our training, we do scenario-based training. We want to make sure people, well, not people, but officers are aware of how to interact, how to use the incident decision-making model, how to assess a situation, how to de-escalate, how to use verbal defense. Verbal defense is our first line. We want to say, we want to talk to people. And when I first came out in patrol, I had a field training officer. He told me, he said, I'd rather have a 30-minute talk than a 30-second fight any day. And so that's my message to everyone. We got time. Let's talk. Let's talk till we're blue. And if we can get someone without using force, that's what we want to do. And so that's what we do with our scenario base. We put officers in those real life situations. And so it's pass fail. We want to make sure you pass, but also if you don't, then you go through remedial training to make sure they get it right. And I think that's why you see that we have a lot of good rapport in this community, is that we take it very extensively. We visit the Civil Rights Museum. That's part of our training. I want to make sure officers are aware of our history. Policing hasn't always stood on the right side of history, but we can't do anything about what's happened in the past, but we can in the future. And so we want officers to know, hey, this is what happened, but this is what we can do differently. And the entire police department goes through that, including recruits.
Okay. Let me ask you about your relationship with the Community Oversight Board. Mm-hmm. You've been in the paper about that. Tell me a little bit about, I know different philosophies on that one too. How are you going to work with the Community Oversight Board?
I want to have a great relationship with the Community Oversight Board. Just like elected officials, they're an elected board, and we want to make sure they're successful. And so we actually have a meeting coming up next week. We're actually trying to see how we can get the MOU signed where they can have access to records. And that's really been the sticking point for them, is having access to records that are still open. Say you take a hypothetical case, you take maybe a Tabitha Tutors, and you look at that and you say, well, that's very sensitive, and we have to be careful on who gets that, who reviews it. And so we need to see how we can release records, but not release sensitive cases like that. And so we're going to have a discussion, see how we can move forward with MOU. We're already talking to Jill Fitcher when we have incidents that happen. We've called her to say, hey, this is what happened. You can take it to investigate. Commission gets through with their process, and they have policies, procedures that the mayor is going to adopt, and they give it to the police department. I actually want to sit down with the Community Oversight Board and say, hey, what are your thoughts? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about everything. Let's talk about how they can be more involved with investigations in the police department. Let's see how they can be more involved with oversight of what we do and our procedures. So with me, and I actually, when I talked to the board, I remember someone said it was refreshing for me to talk to them, is that I want to have that good relationship. We had over 100, maybe 130,000 people or whatever that voted for this board. And so people, our community has spoken, and they believe in this. And I believe in my community. And if they want this, I want it as well. And so we're going to have a good relationship as long, however short or however long I'm in the seat. I think we're frozen. Hello. I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Okay, he may be logging back on.
Okay.
So he may have to log back on. So
Okay.
I am looking, I'm going to let you go from here. You can talk about anything you want. Oh, I tell you what, will you talk about your service in the Domestic Violence Division?
Yeah.
And how it relates now with family safety?
You know, the Family Safety Center is probably one of the greatest things that I've seen. But when I went to the Domestic Violence Division, I didn't know a lot about more than taking a report, more than that we needed to make sure the victim was taken care of, and more that the suspect was held accountable, dealing with Sergeant Wynn. When I went to the Domestic Violence Division, I seen there was over 26,000 cases a year that comes in, that there was a group of detectives willing and able to investigate domestic violence. But what I didn't know a lot about is that we had counselors. And these counselors are some of the best counselors in the nation, I think. And so people actually, if they're having concerns, issues with domestic violence, and they really don't want a police department involved, they can actually contact a counselor. They can contact one of ours, and they can give them safety measures, protocols. They can get them in shelters. They can give them plans on how to leave a situation to make them safe. And so the Family Safety Center has all that. They've just expanded that. They've expanded the victim services. When you go there, you see plainclothes people, you see counselors, you see a warm and welcoming environment. The colors are really neat. And so they have this friendly concept. And so they can get orders of protection. They can be taken to shelter. And so they can get a complete list of services and even connect it with the Sexual Assault Center. They can have a continuum of care for children. And so what I saw in domestic violence and what I'm seeing in the Family Safety Center is just an expansion of a great process to help more people. Domestic violence is, especially with the coronavirus, at first it was pretty stable. It didn't go up or down, but across the country and here, it's starting to spike. And so people should know that not only do we have a domestic violence division quite capable of handling anything, we have a family safety center who can connect them and provide them any services they want. And it's very impressive. And what Diane Lance is doing over there is amazing.
Okay. Well, so George, thank you for stepping in while I disappeared for a few minutes. But Chief, I think we got time for one more question. Tell me a little bit we really didn't talk about the morale of the police department.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about how you know, I know we've had some gaps in trying to bring people in, gaps in the number of recruits, that type of thing. How do you deal with the morale of the police department?
So the way I'm dealing with morale is I'm having talks with different people. I'm going out to roll calls. I'm going out to the COVID roll calls, and we're just putting a positive message out. And really the message is we signed up to be police officers to help people. We signed up to do good things, and we get to do that. And sometimes we deal with things that are not so pleasant, but we have to deal with that. And we go in and we honor our oath of office, and we do that for our entire community. We also want to give them things that they want as well. One thing that they wanted was a summer uniform. They wanted a polo-like uniform when they work special events. 100-degree heat and wearing this type of uniform is difficult. I'm all for that. I'm gonna give them that. I've talked to John Button in the mayor's office. That's a major win for them. Another thing is they want to go to 4-10 shifts, 4 days, 10 hours. Get more time with their families. You improve their family life, you improve their work life. Right now, we don't have the personnel to get there, but we're trying to get there with recruitment. And so I've expanded our recruitment section. Deputy Chief Loki is putting together a team that resembles the community. And so once we get that, we'll build that base. Hopefully we're gonna have more officers. We can give 4 10-hour shifts. And so then we'll look at some other policies and procedures that they look as kind of not good for them, or maybe ran them away to other places. And I think the thoughts that I've had, some talks that I've had with some of the supervisors, some of the officers, I think is going to be beneficial in bringing them back, or just one, improving our numbers, but also bringing some back. In fact, I had one that left, and he was just really cynical about leaving. Said he left for less money, and we talked. And he's excited about me. He's excited about what we can do in the future. And he's applied to come back. He wants to be back. And we're going to have more like that. And I think people see me as that positive force, that positive person that wants to, one, the community comes first. But also I want to make sure officers have a great work environment. And I've always had this thing, happy boss, happy life. We have happy officers. We have a happy community. And so we're going to try to give them anything we can to make them better. So we've also had talk with Kevin Barrett with the Titans, and just convincing, that he wants to know how we can convince kids that being a Black officer is cool. And so we're going to partner with the Titans and with Kevin Barrett in particular, and just keep getting that message out. And that's part of the community engagement too, is getting out and meeting people where they are. So people can see who we are, so people can see the good side. And then hopefully it's just going to grow from there, and we're just going to have a better police department. So.
Well, Chief, thank you. Thank you for your time. It's just after 11. So we appreciate you giving up an hour on a Saturday morning to talk to us. I know there's a lot of interest. So I know that the chief, officially the interim chief, but has applied for the role of chief, and we'll figure something out in October. Good luck. Thank you so much for being on here. Very important issues, a lot of people paying attention. Thank you for your time. I will tell you that we will have Quante Hughes Toombs on next Saturday. Okay. If you don't know who Quante is, she is the new chair of the Metro Council Budget Committee. So we're going to talk to her about that. Chief, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor, a pleasure. Have me back anytime you want. I love my community, love serving them. Looking forward to meeting more council members and just doing great things for our community and improving. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for your service. Honored to have you on. And we're going to be looking for that picture from Wendy's. Okay.
All right.
See what you can find and get it to us, and then we're going to post it. Okay.
Absolutely. I'll do it.
All right. Everybody be safe this weekend. Have a good rest of the weekend. Thanks, everybody. Chief, thank you again. All right.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You too.